Jerome Myers is an award-winning engineer, investor, mentor, and business strategist who helps clients double their revenue, time off, and charitable giving through his masterminds and coaching programs. He is a general partner in a multifamily real estate portfolio and serves on the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University Entrepreneurship Advisory Board. A noted media expert, Jerome has been featured in Business Insider, Black Enterprise, Entrepreneur, Biz Now, and has appeared on CBS, ABC, and Fox. Jerome has interviewed numerous newly exited operators, or NEOs, on his top-ranked Dreamcatchers podcast, which features inspiration, education, and direction to his audience of founders. In a sea of transactional, low-quality interactions, Jerome seeks to build deep, mutually beneficial relationships. And now, please welcome to the stage, Jerome Myers.
Great morning, everybody. So good to be with you. I come to this conference from a place that's a lot different from most of the speakers you're here today. I'm really just grateful to be here. Back on August 13th, 2005, I was in a head-on accident with a dump truck. Most of you don't know anatomy that well, but that's a femur. Both of my femurs look like that post-accident. I was trapped in the car for a little over an hour. I got cut out with the jaws of life, medevaced, was in ICU for a few days, then on the orthopedic floor. And it gave me that moment to really reflect. I think a lot of people get to a place in life and they're excited to be there because they achieved what they wanted to be when they were 8 years old. But for me, I got to wash all that away and think about what I wanted to be now that I had a second chance at life. Now, I don't know how many of you have had near-death experiences, but it's one of the few spaces in your life where you actually have to pause. I talked to somebody here, I think it was this morning, it was Tim, and he said he dropped dead at 36 with a heart attack. And then he went on to tell me some really touching stories about people that he's helped because he found purpose outside of his firm. Now, I don't know what you're working on outside of your firm or if you're working on anything, but I encourage you to consider that because dying in a meeting isn't what the ultimate goal of advising is. And I've heard a lot of people say it. If your goal is to die in a meeting, I'm telling you that you're missing it because there's bigger impact for you than advising. Now, when I left that morning, I was looking to get a haircut. I just moved to a new city, fresh out of college. I was about a month into my new job, and I hadn't had my first haircut. Now, you'll get pictures of me older when I actually used to go to the barbershop. But I didn't know I was in a one stoplight town. It wasn't even a stoplight. We had 2 stop signs. I didn't know where the barbershop was. I didn't use any tools. I just figured I'd drive around. I had to run into one. But what I found out was if you don't know where you're going, you won't like where you end up. If you don't know where you're going, you won't like where you end up. And this is going to come back up along with the car accident. Many of you have thought about the exit. We've identified 8 exits of a founder. The exit that most of you think about is exit 6. It's when you get the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But there's a study published by Harvard Business Review, and it says, congrats on selling your business. A longtime mentor said the day after I signed the paperwork, and then he said, now get ready for depression. I don't actually think most people suffer from depression. I think it's something else. I don't think it's actually a diagnosis, and we'll dive into that in a little bit. But imagine you got to the pot of gold, the wire hits, and all you feel is despair. Everybody's quiet. That's no fun. Let's dive back. Let's go back. So in college, I got the opportunity to do an internship in Eritrea. And we were building a communications building for the State Department. And so this is with me and Sammy and Abebe. I can't believe that that was like 20 years ago. So I know some people think I'm only 30. I'm trying to make myself older. I got the gray hairs in case you guys aren't paying attention. I played football 4 years in college. I graduated summa cum laude with a civil engineering degree. Went to business school, got an MBA. Got into consulting after leaving the power company. Got to do international work. I got on the cover of this magazine because I was consulting to the government of Ghana. And so I was spending time in Accra trying to improve the infrastructure system. Why does any of this matter to you guys? I've built big teams. That success led me to this one, where I got the opportunity to build a $20 million division of a Fortune 550 company. $0 when I showed up on January 13th, got our first project. I was employee number 2. 175 employees when we got to September. End of the year, 30% profit margins, and it was my P&L. That got me on the trip. We had celebrations, talking about the things that we had done that nobody else had been able to do, because this was the first time that a project like this had been encountered. We were taking overhead power lines, putting them underground. On December 24th at 4:55, I got a phone call from a guy that I saw once a quarter and talked to every other week. And he said, "Hey, Jerome, we're going to lay half your team off." I said, "That's not the right answer. What are you talking about?" He said, "Yeah, we've been going back and forth about this for a couple of weeks, and I made a decision." I said, "No, we didn't make a decision." He said, "I made a decision. I'm calling to tell you what's going to happen." And I said, "Uh-oh, I'm not actually in control. It feels like I'm in control, but I'm not actually in control." So I went through the process. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I didn't celebrate the holiday, right? And I figured out how we were going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And I gave up my agency. I said, they made me do it. It wasn't up to me. They made me do it. And I decided in that moment that I would never give up my agency again. I never wanted somebody else to dictate to me what I could or couldn't do. And so I traded in their truck for my truck. I got into real estate because when I was in college, me and my buddy Duran were sitting on the stoop, and we started doing a little bit of math. I was paying $395. I had 2 roommates paying $395. He did the same thing downstairs, and this guy was making $700,000 a year. When we multiplied it across the complex, we never saw him, we never talked to him. Now, my dad was a soldier, so making $70,000 a year would have been a big accomplishment for me. But $700,000, and I didn't have to go somewhere to actually earn that money, that makes sense. And when I think about advising, I see people staying in the field because, hey, I only have to have a couple of meetings, and maybe I have 4-day weekends all the time. And you're not pushed to go do something else because the money's still coming in. And it's not really hard work, but if you thought about what you had to do, for those of you who started in your 20s, if you still had to do that when you were in your 60s or 70s, you'd probably get out of the business faster than the people who leave in their 20s. I'll come back to that. I traded my truck in, and this young lady that's sitting in the front looked at me, and she said, "You can do it." And I didn't quite know what I was going to do, because all the banks that I went to told me no, even though I had an 800 credit score. They told me I didn't have the right experience. They told me the projects I wanted to do were too ambitious. And so I pivoted because I wanted to buy apartments, and I started fixing and flipping. Then I walked upstairs one day, and she's sitting in the bed, and she's covered in sheets of paper. I was like, what's going on? And she saw me, because there's a strategy that we use to get deals in real estate where you handwrite the name on the envelope so that the people will actually open what's inside of it. She saw me doing that, and I came upstairs to go to bed, and she was doing it for me. And it was in that moment that I said, there's no way that I'm going to fail. There's no way that somebody believes in me that much that I'm not going to actually deliver on what she sees in me. And what I found over the years is that most people don't have somebody who actually believes in them. They willpower it, they brute force it. They think everybody out there is against them and it's on them to figure it out all on their own. And this is specifically the case for people who exit. You don't exit because you're scared to start over. If you do exit, you don't know if anybody believes in you. And we'll dive deeper into that because it's far too common and nobody talks about it. Because everything's supposed to be good once you have the check. The wire hits and everything's supposed to be perfect. Now you got time and you have money, but a bunch of other stuff is missing. So, we finally get into the apartment stuff. I find the most dilapidated townhomes we could find in a great area, partner with some guys, and I get featured in a business journal. All the banks that didn't want to lend to me, and I'm stubborn, I went to 10 and they all told me that I didn't know what I was doing and they weren't going to give me $1 million to go buy a thing, came back. And I sent this to my mom because I like to impress my mom. I said, Mom, I made it. I was in the paper. And it said, Glenwood has been a kind of an eyesore. It's dilapidated and we want to clean it up. My whole game has been about finding things that aren't optimal, working on them, and then extracting the value so that we can improve people's experiences. Now, I will tell you, my parents don't really understand what I do today. I pulled up with my mom and the girls and my dad, and she was like, why does that say Myers? I was like, we own it. And she said, on what? Which one? I said, all of them. And she said, all of them? She said, all right, well, you need to do some gardening. There's potholes in the parking lot. You need to fix those. Somebody's junky car is there. You need to fix that. And then I took her to another one, and she said, why is the sign not painted? And so my mom goes immediately into fix mode, right? She's the consummate fixer. But if I don't know anything, I always know that she's there to help. She's always going to have my back, even if she doesn't know how. We do the real estate, it gets pretty popular, and then I realize that nobody actually cares about the buildings. Not even me. I realized that I went from a person that was leading a team of 175 people to leading a team of 2 or 3. And I was like, why do I feel empty? Where's the impact? It's cool to have HGTV-like photos for a fix and flip house. It's nice to have a building, but where's the impact? And so we went deep, and I started guesting on podcasts, 700 plus. Started hosting a podcast. Brian's episode just came out 2 weeks ago. Another advisor that recently exited, David Trent, it came out this past weekend. But what we do on the Dreamcatchers podcast is we tell the stories of people who have exited. And we talk about what it was like, because I don't believe anybody's truly having the conversation. Sure, you can get the watch, you can get the ring, you can get the fast car, you can go on the trip, but then what? And I don't see many people actually having this conversation, and I think we can dig into why people are avoiding it. So how many of you help people exit? Raise them high. Feels good when you grab that AUM, doesn't it? That's a good grab, isn't it? You're not fighting with anybody over the 401k rollover. It's been working for 30 years. Why would I change it? I trust those guys. Well, we got a better plan for you. When somebody exits, it's a whole lot more money, and it's usually somebody who's going to be more trusting. How many of you want to help people exit? Can you raise your hand so I can see? So for the people who didn't raise their hand and say they want to help people exit, what's the strategy that you have that's going to get huge AUM, not fighting over the 401k, access to other high-level entrepreneurs, actually have some interesting financial planning needs, because I think most of you are tired of doing the same plan over and over and over again. And people who have new money and don't quite know what to do, so they're actually looking for somebody to help them, because they can't go to their parents because their parents don't understand what to do with millions of dollars because they didn't have it. They got a pension plan. My hope is that everybody wants to help people exit because it is the biggest liquidity event. People talk about the home being the biggest asset that people have. The biggest opportunity for liquidity is somebody selling a business. And if you're not helping people with that, I think you're missing a huge opportunity. Now, there were people who are in the room who actually help people exit. How many have seen somebody crash and burn on the backside of their exit? Raise them high. And it happens over and over and over again. But nobody deals with it. Nobody talks about it, at least in our research. Wells Fargo says 75% of business owners regret selling their business. They don't say why they regret selling their business. They just say they regret selling their business. And so for everybody who thinks retirement is a curse word, this is why. Like, oh my God, I'm never going to retire. I'm just going to work forever. For me, retirement means you're work optional. It means you don't have to go trade your time for money. And I think most people aspire to be that as quickly as possible, because then you can actually do it because it's fun. So I was talking to a guy, and he told me the success that I've had up until this point was the equivalent of building a lemonade stand. He said, Jerome, we've done $70 billion in exits, and I've helped 82 people, and da-da-da-da-da. And I said, okay, congratulations. He's like 65 or something like that. I said, so what happens when your clients exit? He says, I don't know. I'm getting ready to talk to a guy who exited for $1 billion on this next call, and I'm not going to be late for that one. I said, that's fine. I'm not asking you to be late for the call. I only want the time that we've agreed to share. But what happens? And he said this, I don't know. Our engagement is over at that point because I helped them scale and exit. I said, yeah, but I mean, you have to stay in contact with them. You spend years with these folks. You're increasing CAGR. What happens? He said, oh, well, they can go to places like YPO and Tiger 21 and EO. I said, so group coaching is the answer? Like, is that group actually going to help them figure out what they're going to do next, or are they just going there to hang out and share some war stories maybe? But I don't think that there's really that much conversation. And so he said, well, it's one answer. And I said, so what happens? And he never gave me an answer. And then he's like, you know what, Jerome, you know what I do for a living? I give CEOs the opportunity to be coaches. And I said, do you know how many people hate going to coaching calls? On both sides. For most people, that's a nightmare because they just don't have the demeanor to do it. They're not actually interested in doing that. And he was like, well, I got to go. I got to go talk to this billionaire. By the way, I think he'd eat you up if you talked to him. I said, I'm not worried about that, brother. Anyway, so can you tell I'm a little grumpy about it? So we get off the call. And then I thought back to an experience that we had. And so I was at a business conference maybe 2 years ago, 18 months ago, and I'm sitting in a room, and I'm listening to this guy. He goes by Jay Cron. He was the CEO of Kajabi. Kajabi had a $2 billion valuation when they exited. And he's been out of the job for 18 months or so at this point. And he runs through his rant. He's like, here's my 7-point plan to have a double unicorn exit and some other stuff, tech jargon, stuff that I don't really understand. And so I'm standing in the back, listening. And he said one word that caught my attention. He said, crisis. And so let's watch this video.
At some point, I promise you, if you want it badly enough and you pursue it hard enough, you are going to make enough that you're going to have an existential crisis. My man, all suited up.
Hey everybody, Jerome Myers. So I'm gonna take it to a place where I'm really interested because I find
I'm not gonna lie, that's a very enticing setup. I'm not really sure where this is going.
You ready? Because it's coming. You joked and you was like drinking and thinking, and you mentioned the word crisis. And how'd you know you were in crisis?
Well, just like any extremely self-aware, very introspective and intelligent individual like myself, my wife told me, Nicole literally said so I'd really like In-N-Out for lunch and you should pick up a job application. And I was like, Really? What my wife pointed out is she said, I can tell the physiological difference in how you walk around the house, how you interact with me. I can tell when you have had a business stimulating conversation that day for your brain and the days that you haven't. Because the days that you have, that's the guy I married. That's like, hey, bang, bang, super fun. And the other days you're like sad panda moping around, like either trying to find another watch to buy or trying to make up some home project to fix that you're gonna hire out for anyway because you can't do any of the shit. That was the indicator. The indicator was like, oh, I'm not me anymore. And I didn't feel like me for a while, but I also thought I was hiding it a lot better than I was.
So how'd you get out, and was it worth it?
How did I get out of feeling that way?
Yeah.
I'll let you know when I do.
I'll let you know when I do. So the thought that money fixes it is wrong. And I mean, he and I go back and forth for about 10 minutes to give you all perspective on how long this played out. But 18 months of drinking and thinking, as he described it, all the APs you could ever desire if you're a watch person. He talked about some cars. He talked about all of the things that most people would think are going to make them happy on the backside of an exit. And he still didn't have an answer. And he's got access to all the resources that most people think they would need in order to be able to find themselves. We'll bring Jay Khan back later, because there was another important part of our exchange that I think you will get value from. But I want everybody to get this point. He said, I'm having an existential crisis, and his wife had to tell him. He wasn't even aware enough to know, but he knew something was wrong. He just didn't think anybody else around him knew. So how often does it happen? If you don't have a next, it is guaranteed to happen. We'll come back to that point. So I went deep, and I was like, who's helping people with this? I'm looking for the person that is serving the folks who have exited, and they're trying to figure out next. Because backpacking through Europe is not going to help you find your next. And I can guarantee you scuba diving in the Caribbean somewhere might feel good for a week. But if you've been getting up at 5 o'clock, working out, going to the office, staying in the office till 6, then doing the kids' stuff, and then, stopping is like running into a brick wall. It's like having a head-on accident with a dump truck like I did. You can't go from full speed to 0 without things breaking. Who helps them? People say go to a therapist, go to a psychologist, go to a psychiatrist. What about a career counselor? Like, can you work at In-N-Out like Jay Cron? His wife told him to do? I don't know. Your friends. Most of your friends aren't going to exit. It's rare. Your spouse, if you have a relationship where you feel like you can be vulnerable with your spouse, but if you're like most people who are apex performers, you have your cape on and your chest out and your chin high, and there's never anything wrong. And if you show up vulnerable with that person, they're going to freak out, which is only going to make it more stressful. And so you don't feel comfortable sharing that stuff with them. The dog always understands, but the dog can't talk back. They won't talk back, but they'll wag their tail, the tongue will hang out, and they'll look at you. If they know that you're down, they might come lay their head on your leg, but they can't say anything back, and they can't give you any guidance on what you're supposed to do. So we was like, okay, well, you could go to those places. We go back to that. You could go to those places, but those first 3 can't give you a diagnosis because you don't have one, unless it's gotten really bad and you're depressed. But that takes a really long time. And most people wouldn't say they're depressed because they're apex performers. So all you got to do is take action, right? And then it fixes it all. So then we was like, okay, well, let's go do some scholarly research. I found a case study with some MBA students at Yale, and they laid out 5 or 6 people who had exited and what they experienced, and they all experienced the same thing. There was that article that I highlighted earlier from HBS. And then there might be some random articles, but there was no like actual research done to figure out what this problem is called, why it's different than the other stuff. Because, I mean, you just hit the lottery. Everything should be great. And that was all there was. So this happens over and over again. I had at least 10 people raise their hands and say they help people exit and they seen people crash and burn on the backside. And people just kind of shrug their shoulders at it. So, the NEO, the newly exited operator, signs the papers, the wire hits, or they get the paper check. I like paper checks. So we did an exit in May of 2023, and I got the check. I got the check. I showed her the check. She just kind of looked at me. I sent the picture to my dad. He was like, oh, so what are you going to do now? And I said, I guess I'm going to think. We took the whole summer off. Anyway, so they signed the papers, the wire hits, and then everybody that you worked on that project, that deal with, vanishes. Think about it. The people you spend the most time with, and we're going to make this very clear for you, are gone because they're with the deal, or your partnership is over because you no longer have that deal that you were working on. But as financial advisors, if you were fortunate enough to be on the front side of the exit, you're the only person that goes with them on the journey. Because now your work begins. Now you have the AUM. But if they don't have a next, whatever planning you did before they got the money is going to burn. I don't see Rod in here, but he works with professional athletes. And he and I were talking about how when athletes don't listen, they end up going broke. New money, if that person's identity didn't grow in order to be somebody that holds that kind of money, will always send the money away. Because they don't, a lot of times, feel like they're worthy to have it. And so they find ways to use the money that aren't the most beneficial. And you as an advisor can try to talk to them, but I mean, for most instances, you talk to them twice a year, maybe. I talk to my advisor less than once a year now because I put the money back in the business instead of sending it to him to manage. So I went from an A customer to probably a C customer at this point. But if your client doesn't have a next, whatever you thought was going to happen with that AUM is going to go by the wayside. So why don't people help founders, NEOs, with this? I think it's messy. It's less awkward to pretend like you don't notice something's wrong unless you're being irritated by your spouse walking around like a sad panda, right? But if you only see somebody once or twice a year, it's like, oh yeah, he's good, no worries. The outcome on the backside isn't linear. It's not this perfect 3-point plan that you can use to say, oh yeah, well, if we do this and do this and do this, you're going to have fulfillment. Everybody's perception who hasn't done it is that they should be happy. Then there's the uncomfortable conversation of, hey, there's something wrong. Are you okay? Oh yeah, I'm fine, I'm great, I'm working on this, I'm working on that. I actually used to work with a managing partner who exited last year. He exited on December 31st, and he sent me a paragraph about all the things that he's doing now, none of which he's passionate about. And I know that because we worked together for 2 years prior to him exiting. But for him being busy was a way for him to show me that he was okay. And I know for a fact that he's not. But he doesn't want help. The success of your next is subjective in a lot of ways. When the scoreboard was how much money did I make or how much is my book, oh, it's great. When it's, well, how many lives did I impact or how many kids did I get to the hospital so that they could get the treatment that they need or have their family with them while they're going through treatment and they didn't have that burden, it's different. And how much is each one of those worth? That feels different. But for you, Tim, I know that it has a real impact on your life and you know that you're solving a problem for people that they probably couldn't solve themselves. And then the ugly one, you have to deal with feelings. I was talking to somebody, they got emotional and they apologized. They said, I'm sorry. I said, what are you sorry for caring about? He said, well, you know, we live in a world where caring isn't really embraced. What I didn't tell him, but I will tell to the whole room is when I had the division of 175 people, I had the reputation for the people that I reported into for the guy who cared too much. And I didn't care because I don't think that's a bad thing. I think my mom would be pretty proud of that. And so you don't have to hide your feelings. I think caring is a good thing. And not that you need my permission, but if you want permission, you now have permission to care. Seeing humans as humans is a good thing. Not wanting them to suffer is an even better thing. Being willing to lift a hand and do something about it, I think, is the highest order. So what's the problem called? Because I've talked a lot. What's the problem called? It's called the Founder's Exit Paradox. And it's the multifaceted emotional and psychological complexities founders face when detaching from their entities, enterprises, companies, whatever you want to call it. Some people call them babies. You spend 30 years building something and then you think you're just going to walk away? I just don't know how it's possible. But you can go through a process that doesn't make it feel like you're slamming into a wall. The first thing we did was we did a white paper. And so if you want access to our white paper, you're going to get this funky disclaimer on your phone. It's going to say, we've got cookies. Just reject the cookies. And you can get access to a 30-page white paper that we put together that ties into scholarly research, positive psychology. It goes through a lot of the best practices for coping with a major loss, because even though you're getting something, there is a loss. We talk about the levels of happiness, and we talk about learned helplessness, which is something that most of you would say, I will never experience, but it shows up over and over and over again. And being aware of these things, I believe, will better prepare you for advising your clients and then eventually for you to get out. So I want to reiterate. When I left the $20 million division that I built, I went through it. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Rick Edelman, but when I got to hang out with him and we recorded a conversation, he went through it. And I'll let him tell it in his own words. But for those of you who don't know Rick, he built a huge company, huge, and it still continues to grow even though he's a minority owner now.
You're right. It's knowing it's coming has been helpful in our efforts to prepare. But still, nothing truly prepares you. You know, it's the same thing we all experience with death. You know, when you have a parent who's dying and you watch them dying in front of you over a long period from a long illness, or a spouse or a college friend or sibling, you know the death is coming, but nevertheless, when it occurs, being prepared, there was no such thing. You're still not prepared. It's devastating. And so to some degree, although Gene and I knew that our exit from Edelman Financial would one day occur, when it finally did, it was nevertheless devastating, because this was our life for 30 plus years. This was who we wrapped ourselves in with, who we were. And it meant the end of many relationships. It meant the end of commonality, people we had things that we did on a daily basis with, our friends in the business and colleagues in the industry. Those relationships altered. And they're still in the game, they're still doing it, but we're not, or we're doing it in different ways. And so there is always that challenge. We made it easier, more palatable, more tolerable, because we didn't have the pure void. It dramatically improved. It's kind of like saying you're driving a car, you're going to hit the brick wall, you can't stop it. There's nothing you can do about it. But at least you can put on a seatbelt. At least you can apply the brakes so that when you do hit the wall, it's not as big a bash as it otherwise would have been. And so the preparation was of tremendous help. But I don't want it to mislead anybody. It is still a challenge, and it's a transition. Even though it's been a year and a half, it's still a transition Gene and I continue to go through.
And so I don't want my whole thing is telling people the truth. I don't want anybody to believe that you won't experience anything that is going to be unpleasant, because it's part of it. But the liquidity event, if you spend your time focused on that, is going to be very rewarding. The things that you can do with those resources can be very rewarding. But what's even more rewarding is when you take off that Letterman jacket if you were a high school football player or a varsity cheerleader, and you put it away and you step into whatever is next. And I believe that there's a next chapter, a second mountain for everybody. Now, I don't know that I have time to get through everything, but there is a sheet of paper on your table. It's got blue writing, a blue header. And I want to try to get through this. And we're going to try to do this in 3 minutes. So the first thing I need for you to do is write the 5 people you spend the most time with. People will tell me I don't have 5. I will tell people not to cheat and say my spouse and my 4 kids are the 5 people I spend the most time with. I want you to actually think about people outside of your household. If you can do that in 10 seconds, you don't have to write their whole name, just put a letter if you're scared they might see it. All right, put your pen down when you have the 5 so that I kind of know who is done. Okay. All right, so we got the 5. Now, the way that we think about relationships is capacity and contribution. Capacity is the ability to help. It's access to resources. It's access to network. The ability to help you do what's next for you. Then there's contribution. I think about this as getting dirt under your nails. The person who's actually going to help you. So somebody who's high contribution would be writing letters when you come up to bed because that was the way that they knew to help you. Capacity could be, here's a great strategy that you can implement, or here's somebody that you should talk to, like some of the great introductions Brittany and Brian have made for me since I've been here. So now we want to take those 5 people and put them in the respective quadrant. So somebody can be high capacity, high contribution. Somebody could be high capacity, low contribution. They could be low capacity, low contribution, or low contribution, or high contribution, low capacity. And the goal here is to just get everybody on there. We won't get it perfect this time, but I want you to think about each person for each axis. So if I say Ray, she is high capacity, high contribution when I do this matrix. It's called 2C matrix. She knows a whole lot of people. She runs a really big division of a university. And she can help me, like rearranging her schedule just to come sit in the front so that I don't feel like I'm an idiot when I'm standing on stage talking to people that I might not have ever talked to before. So put your 5 people on the grid. Rate them high capacity, high contribution, high capacity, low contribution. You want to work through that. I'll give you, 20 seconds. Just put the initial, assuming you don't have repeats. Now, I'm going to pick on Brittany because she's done this before. And I am going to ask her, how many people are high capacity, high contribution for you? 2. We got a mic.
2.
So Brittany has 2. Okay. How many people are high capacity, low contribution?
High capacity, low contribution. Mm-hmm. None.
Okay. How many people are high contribution, low capacity?
2.
2. And then that leaves 1 that is low capacity, low contribution. Low, we call draining. Those are folks who I consider to be energy vampires. The people who are high contribution, low capacity, we call them uninspiring. So they're here to help. You tell them what to do, and they'll do it for you. But they're not going to advance it for you. They're not going to open new doors for you. The one that she had 0 in, which is high capacity, low contribution, we call that underutilized. So here's a person that's got access. They can open doors, but they're not really showing up for you. And then there's high capacity, high contribution. That's mutually beneficial. That's it. So Brittany, thank you for sharing. I think that shifted a little bit from when you did it the first time, which is great that you're making progress. The goal is for you to have as many mutually beneficial and underutilized relationships as possible. Brittany's the perfect example of an apex performer. 66% of her people are low capacity. You're usually the high achiever in your group when you're a top player. And so I encourage people to intentionally look for other people that they can add to their 5. And I used to tell people, hey, get rid of your 5. And then somebody was like, oh, my spouse is low. And I was like, I guess you should get a divorce. And then Ray was like, don't ever say that again. That's really insensitive. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I can't tell people not to be married. But I can tell you to spend more time with people so that that person's not in your 5. So we'll do that. The 6 centers of doubt. I decided this exercise was more interesting than going through all of them, but just know that as you navigate the exit paradox, you're going to have these 6 centers of doubt where you're asking these questions. Now, on that paper, I think there's a question at the bottom, or maybe there's a statement, and it's like, this number of people are not related to blank. So the last blank is business. So how many people in your 5 are not related to your business? Is somebody willing to hold up their hand and give me an indication? 4 people in your are not related to business. Outstanding. 1. There it is. 1. 3? I didn't see that coming. 2. So what I was expecting is 3 or less. What I was expecting is 3 or less. So think about that. You walk out the door, and the 5 people you spend the most time with, 3 of them are gone. So now you got 2, maybe. I just want to make it real for you that when you separate, that there's going to be real change. And the easiest way for it is the people you spend the time with. So let's go back to J. Cron, because this is his perspective. And I'll tell you, spoiler alert, I disagree with him, but this is his perspective.
The authenticity, though, like, we're laughing, but I mean, it's terrifying.
Well, it's also one of those things that no one will ever talk to you about it. Because, I mean, the reason is, and rightfully so, no one feels bad for you. Like, I mean, yeah, great, John, it's a problem. I don't feel bad for you. I mean, no one ever is like, oh, I'm so sorry, you can't find yourself right now. Like, it's just not the way that goes. And it's the reason why nobody talks about it, because it makes you sound tone deaf. And let me be clear, it's not a problem. It's an exploration. It's a season. It's something that I get to lean into with a lot of messy, uncomfortable stuff internally and figure out. But it is most definitely not a problem in the way that problems are truly defined. So I don't want to mischaracterize it as that. It's not that. And you did deliver. You said I didn't know where you were taking me, and you were right.
I like delivery. He said it's not a problem. It is a problem. We see people commit suicide. We see people drink. We see people get addicted and have to go to rehab. We see people blow up the legacy that they've been working on for the past 30 years. We see people ruin their relationship with their spouse, and on and on and on. It is a problem if you don't do something about it. And so we want to do something about it. We released a book called Next. J. Cron talked about exploring. The X in Next is for exploring, but it's a 4-step thing, and it worked out pretty cool. We got bestseller in 3 categories on Amazon. I couldn't capture the bottom part when we had 25, so we got to 25 in occupational and organizational psychology. Feels pretty good for somebody who went to engineering school. And so the next process, this is a screenshotter, picture taker type deal, right? So nourish, because I'm not going to go through all of them because I don't have time. Evaluate. Then you want to explore and transcend. This process, we believe, is the most efficient way for folks to get it. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and they were celebrating 30 years in business, March 1 or something like that. And he said, I wonder if I should celebrate. There he is. What's up, Chris? He said, I wonder if I should celebrate. He's like, I just skipped through. I was like, well, I think so. But most of us as apex performers, we've been taught to just achieve, keep going. There is no nourishment. We just keep going. But you need to take time to reflect. You need to take time to unpack. You need to get rid of the old stuff if it doesn't serve you for the new stuff. And we want to evaluate. We want to look what resources are available. We want to identify what gaps there are. with who we want to be when we think about what we're leaving behind as a legacy in this second chapter. Then we want to explore. So where are the new paths? What are the things you're passionate about? I went and got that thing off the shelf called real estate. And then find fulfillment, because that's the whole game. But you gotta have passion, you have to have purpose in order to find fulfillment. And it doesn't just start day one. So, you don't have to raise your hand. But this is the question for everybody in here, because your relationship with your business will end at some point. Some people leave because they want. Some people sell and get the maximum value. Other people are forced out. Some people die. But it will end at some point. So my question is, how many of you are scared to exit because you haven't found your next? And you don't have to tell me, but you should answer it for you, because I watch so many people stay longer than they should. And in staying longer than they should, they have other people who are really eager to move to the next level, unable to move. And then all the time that they spent developing that talent goes somewhere else, instead of continuing to build the thing that you worked so hard for. And so I want to bring Rick back. I've got a ton of respect for Rick, and let him close this out for us, because he said this and I almost did a cartwheel, because I know he's seen a lot. He fashions himself as a continuous learner and somebody who has tremendous insight.
Work you do is so profoundly important, because you're addressing this issue in a way I've really not seen others do, and I really applaud you for that.
And that mattered to me, because better isn't the best, different is the best. And we think we've really nailed this for folks. So I would love to be a resource for anybody who's helping somebody exit, whether it's some kind of lunch and learn webinar thing for your clients. If you know people are struggling, give them a copy of the book. Brian and his team have been very nice, and they've ordered books and they've been sending them all over the place. Somebody posted a slide, the M&A guy posted a slide yesterday, and he basically said like 60% of financial advisors are going to exit, if I'm not mistaken. But that 60% goes across all industries. And so your clients are going to struggle with it. You're probably going to have some issues with it. And the question is, what are you doing to prepare for it? We've created a resource that people can use, and it's very inexpensive, but can save a lifetime of heartache. So with that, I really appreciate everybody's time, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you at EWAS this year.